In the bustling halls of CU Boulder, I stood before a class of eager, budding entrepreneurs, sharing my experiences of starting and exiting a bunch of successful companies. During the Q&A, a young woman asked, what would you tell somebody that is thinking about leaving their career and becoming an entrepreneur? And my response was a little cruel. I told her, don't do it. Don't start. It's too hard. It's lonely. And you're likely to fail both personally and professionally. The person you see in the mirror today will be totally unrecognizable. And it'll happen in less than a year. And I continued, no matter what you think you know about your market, your competition, your customers, capital, culture, 99% of it is wrong. Even if you have decades of experience in the industry you're tackling, you know jack squat now. The most prominent players in your space have more collective data, capital, momentum, experience, customers, traction, connections, assets, resources than you probably could hope to ever have. And then I delivered what I now in hindsight call the final blow. With entrepreneurs, there's a higher rate of suicide, depression, loneliness, divorce. If you're asking me, should you start? My answer is absolutely not. And I remember how quiet the room got. People's shoulders slumped, their faces went pale. But I could, in the room, and it was a couple hundred, I could see 2 or 3 of them that looked at me like I was batshit crazy, that I had no idea what I was talking about. And here's the thing. If I can talk you out of entrepreneurship, you're lucky you never started. I was right for those that quit, and I was wrong for the entrepreneurs. The Henry Ford quote is, if you think you can or you can't, you're right. And I love that quote because that really applies to entrepreneurship. Can anyone become an entrepreneur? Should you? How do you know if you've got what it takes? And all that and more on today's episode of How to Founder. Good morning, everybody. I'm Anthony Franco.
And I'm Chris Franks. How to Founder is where you, the founder, find tips, tricks, and details about being a founder that college professors like me won't teach you.
Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, Anthony. How are you on this fine, hot morning in Denver, Colorado?
It's beautiful. I've already worked out, been up for a few hours. I know you probably just woke up, 2 minutes ago?
About 6. I'm choking down my first cup of coffee, so please do not believe or really listen to what I say for the next 20 minutes or so.
I usually don't listen to what you say anyway.
Fair point. Walked right into that one. Walked right into it.
Thank you. You keep serving the softballs. I'll keep hitting them out of the park.
You
Thank you very much.
Tee them up. You knock them out.
All right, Chris. So given all the obstacles, what do you think the lure of entrepreneurship is?
It's a really good question. I'm really glad we're having this conversation today because it's an important one. I do think that there is something almost woven into the American myth, the American dream about.
Is it a myth or a dream?
Well, I mean, a little bit of both, right? Yeah, because I think, well, for those of us that are doing it, it's a myth, right? It's a dream for everybody else.
Wait a minute.
But this notion that you, based on your own hard work, based on your own skills, your ability to work hard, your ability to endure, your intelligence, your awareness, that any person that arrives in this country, that arrives in this place, in this society, can make something of themselves, can build a life for themselves based on starting their own company. And so I think that there is a particular gravitational pull to that narrative. I think that if you ask people like in corporate America, I would say probably 80% of them somewhere buried deep in the back of the head, except for our wives, because they know, but they would be like, if you ask them, like they have the dream of maybe going, maybe someday I'll just go out and start my own thing. Maybe I'll
But
start
why?
my
Why?
own company.
So why? Again, what's the lure? What do you think the draw is?
So I mean,
And I'm genuinely asking because I've searched my soul on this. Like, why? What's so broken in me that this is the career path that I've created? And I struggle answering the question for myself.
well, I think it's funny because knowing a little bit about your background, like I actually don't know. Did you have a corporate job ever? I mean, you pretty much did this from the time you were
A
almost out of
little
high
bit.
school, right?
I've had a couple of like cubicle jobs. A couple.
Yeah. But it would be like one of those at least was after you exited a company, which is that'll give you a little bit of hubris. It's like, I'm the smartest entrepreneur in the world. But I think that there is an idea, and the closest word that I can say is freedom. And this notion that if you're sort of aware, you're providing value to somebody else. You are making money for other people. And this notion that you could be free of that you could be free to make your own decisions. You don't have to salute a corporate hierarchy, that you could be the person that created the company strategy versus going out and executing a company strategy. I think that there's a lot of, there's an allure to that. Like I said, more of like, it's almost gravity. It's people just are kind of naturally drawn to that. Now they shouldn't be, but they are drawn to that. What about you? I mean, like, I know that you're asking the question genuinely, but I'm sure you've thought about this. What do you believe the allure is?
So it's funny. So I just found a meme that I posted a little bit ago on my LinkedIn that is somewhat related to that. So and I found it on Twitter. The 13-year-old me, don't tell me what to do. Me now. Could someone tell me exactly in chronological order with great deal what I have to do? And that really resonates with me. But at the same time, you're right. Like, that is funny, true, but at the same time, I have this probably unnatural affliction to authority. Let me put it a different way. I have an aversion to bad leadership, and so if you take a corporate job, you lose your ability to navigate bad leadership because your paycheck absolutely relies on it. The other thing that I come to find out about myself recently is I don't want to live under somebody else's value system. And that goes back to freedom, right? So if somebody asks me to do something that I find morally questionable, and I have to choose between doing that and feeding my kids, I'm going to do that. And I don't like that piece of a corporate job. That's not doesn't mean that all corporate jobs are like that, but the likelihood of that happening for you is higher when you have a corporate job. The other piece of it, I'm speaking as though I actually have a choice, that I could choose to go get a corporate job. and Chris, you and I are both the same, where I don't think anybody would want me as an employee. I struggle with that.
I will tell you, if any of my old bosses, anybody that I used to work with ever wanders across this episode, I'm sorry. I was a fucking terrible employee. I was terrible. And it turns out the things that I like to do the most, which is the big picture, the big vision, where we go and rally the team, let's go that direction. I would turn, like, as a frontline sales manager, I would turn to my boss and be like, I think the pricing, our pricing is wrong. You know who has only moderately more institutional power than a frontline sales manager? a frontline middle sales manager. Like they don't have any power. And so you don't want to, how do you humiliate somebody that's your boss? You tell them like, oh, we should do this. And then have to realize that they don't have any power either, right? They're just executing some sort of plan. And I was a miserable employee. And, so being open, honest, and vulnerable, have you had those moments where you sort of secretly dream about like, oh man, I could just, for me, like not even go be a CMO or something. Like I just go be a VP of marketing or a VP of sales or, like something where I could just go in and I feel like, I'm sure it's a difficult job, but I probably could just do it in my sleep and, have this thing called a 401 Kappa or something. I don't even know what it stands for.
401k.
401k. Yeah. Have you had those moments where things get hard where you're like, man, maybe.
Do I look at normal people with envy? Often. Yeah, right. Often. I say it a lot. Entrepreneurs are broken people, and I say that with love and affection. There's something wrong with us that this is the life that we choose. It's also the reason why. Chris, it's the reason why you and I are choosing to do this podcast and all the How to Founders stuff. We're doing peer groups with founders and maybe eventually coaching and consulting. It's because we just love being like birds of a feather, right? We like being in our bubble of broken people, trying to figure out their way in the world and trying to make a dent in the world. Those people are how many entrepreneurs have you talked to that talk about going to a neighborhood barbecue and having nothing, like, I don't know what to say to anybody there. Somebody's talking to me about the weather and I want to shoot myself in the head. There's nothing like, it's me that's the problem, not them. Right? Like I wish I could have that conversation. And every entrepreneur I talk to has that same affliction, if you will.
I think, the interesting question about that is causation versus correlation. So is it true that
I was told there would be no college words in
this? I'm gonna write that one down for my class.
Okay, Mr. College Professor, thank you very much.
It is. You want to talk about hilarious that I have a part-time, very, very part-time job teaching college based on my academic performance was really pretty subpar. Really subpar. The causation versus correlation piece is this is kind of the matrix thing. I can't remember. I think it's the red pill. If you take the red pill, you get to see the truth and you get to see the world as it is. And I feel like doing this job, it forces you, and sometimes brutally, painfully forces you to see the world as it exactly is. And so the example, I was successful early in my career, mainly because I was ambitious and had, a little bit of a head on my shoulders and worked hard. And I had won in every step of my career. I was typically the best in my position. And I'm talking very low level positions, right? Frontline sales. And so I would just sort of worked my way up.
I was the best towel boy at the car wash.
Were you? Amazing.
Yeah.
Nice job.
Yeah.
But I got into my first round of entrepreneurship and I sort of had this sense of entitlement of like, I'm me. Of course I'm going to be successful. Like, why would I not be successful? Like, I'm smart, ambitious, all those things. What? Of course. Mr. Market or whatever the reality is makes you look at that in a very, very real way and realize that, man, my idea sucked. I didn't really love what I was doing. I didn't have a plan on how I was going to, allocate my very, very limited capital. All these things that now, we teach to any entrepreneur that will listen to us. I had none of that. And it was painful. But along the way, it stripped back this kind of false sense of ego. And anything that's been built up underneath it has come from really fucking it up and then, figuring out that you fucked it up and then doing it right a second time. And
Well,
I think that there's beauty in
let's
that.
tug on that. Yeah, let's tug on that thread a little bit because it brings up a really interesting misconception about entrepreneurship that hits you very quick. This notion that leadership means that you get to dictate what happens.
Or that you're in
you're in
charge.
control. You're in control, and you're in charge. And in reality, that is the exact inverse of the truth, right? So talk about that a little bit. I want to eventually get to, how do you know as a human being if entrepreneurship is your thing, or if you should stay in that corporate job. There's various stages of entrepreneurship too. There's side hustles. There's franchise businesses. So what I'm more talking about is taking the leap and doing your own thing and building your own thing. That's really a side hustle. Everybody should be doing a side hustle, getting multiple sources of income. But when you're talking about building a business from the ground up on your own, that's the kind of founder that I'm talking about. What does it take to do that? And one of the things you kind of mentioned was this notion that bringing an employee mindset into your entrepreneurship journey, and how ego has no place. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
How much time you got? It's a it's a tough. It's a weird subject because it's one of those things where both things can be true. To start on this journey, it doesn't take a whole lot of internet research to understand how difficult and how many people fail in this journey, right?
Yep.
80% failure, 85% failure. Venture-backed companies, I think it was 92% failure. So the idea there is that just the odds immediately. What if I told you, like, hey, Anthony, that cup of coffee, it's got an 82% chance to kill you, but 8% chance it could be really good, right? Well, of course you're not going to drink that cup of coffee. But you have to have this level of hubris, and I mean it. It's not even ego. It is hubris to believe that you have what it takes to be successful, where somewhere between 8 and 20% of the population are the only people going to be successful. You are one of those few people that are going to make it. At the same moment, those types of people, they have huge egos, right? I had a huge ego when I left. I was really, really driven by my ego. That ego will work against you for anything that you're going to do. Like, because you said it in the opening, almost every assumption you have is going to be wrong. But you go into it like, oh, I'm super right. I'm smart. I'm amazing. I'm pretty much the best, right? And then systematically, it's going to whittle you down to the point where you almost like, you and I joke all the time. Oh, nice day outside. Is it? I don't even know. I'm not sure. And so the way that I've heard it described best, it's our mutual friend Jim Franklin used to run a company called SendGrid, and he had humble hungry as part of the company culture at SendGrid at the time. And I think it's a perfect analogy for entrepreneurship, because you have to be hungry. You have to have that ego. You have to have that drive, but you have to be humble enough to actually learn something along the way. But that's a lot of words for me. I mean, I want to just flip that question right back on you. Like, what do you think about it? Like, it's a difficult dichotomy. It's a difficult challenge, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think the one constant in entrepreneurship is that there is no constant. and
Right.
that's personality type as well, right? So I was having this conversation with Amanda the other day, and just so everybody knows, Amanda, we're talking to somebody to come on and help us with with growing How to Founder. And
she's gonna be the boss. We're gonna be employees. That's really what you're coming down to. Like we're tired of being in charge.
I just need somebody to tell me what to do.
Just tell me what to do. Exactly.
And she said, well, you know, when looking for founders to join an accelerator or a peer group, and she has lots of experience at recruiting founders into things like Techstars and et cetera. She said, well, you know, you just can't bring on assholes. You know, assholes don't make good founders. And I'm like, that's not true. That's just simply not true. I can understand that we don't want to work with those kinds of people, but if you look at the you know, Jim Franklin's hungry. It was humble, hungry. It was like the 4 H's, right? Humble, hungry, happy, and something else.
I can't remember the other two.
Yeah.
Because the other two don't apply to us. Happy.
I happy may not be one of them, but it's like applying that filter to entrepreneurship doesn't make sense. There are incredibly humble, kind, charming individuals that become founders and are very successful. And then there's ones that aren't, that are just psychopaths. And the more psychopathic you are, the more likely you are to build something that goes IPO. And so I struggle a little bit with what does it take to be a founder, which is the piece that's the whole topic of this show, is what does it take? It takes, I think the only attribute is it takes delusion. It takes the more likely you are to be delusional about your ability to succeed, the more likely you are to succeed, and the more likely you are to fail miserably.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's funny because this is kind of feel like this topic is so meaty that we could just spend an entire hour talking about. We'll use the late great Steve Jobs, right? Steve Jobs, for almost everybody that's been around this game for a while, we quote Steve Jobs all the time. He is an icon. He's also an outlier. He's like trying to be like Steve Jobs is like me trying to have an afro. Like it just is not like it. You're not gonna do that. Not everybody is Steve Jobs.
I am going to Photoshop an afro on you.
I mean, thank you. I've been hoping for some time. You know, maybe just like, you know, some really nice hair, like flock of seagulls look. But this idea that there's these group of people that are so wildly successful, and because there's not a whole lot of information out there about like what we're trying to do, to just be like, hey, what are the practical advice for you to do this job, for you to be good at this job? Just practical advice, right? The only thing we have is the story of the outliers. And so for an entire generation of entrepreneurs, and we came up in this world where, to be a good founder, you have to be a complete maniacal asshole. It turns out that's not true. And also, I wouldn't want to build, when I say that now, I wouldn't want to build Apple. I wouldn't want to build Tesla. I wouldn't want to build SpaceX. That seems like a terrible fucking job, right? You want to talk about no work-life balance? Like Elon Musk slept on the floor of Tesla for like a fucking year. Like, yeah, sexy, right? Like he's incredible. He starts all these companies. He slept on the floor of his factory.
He was a billionaire sleeping on a couch in a conference room, and it wasn't even a comfortable couch. So most of the time he slept on the floor. Like, you're like, get a bedroom, like just import a mattress. He didn't even do that. He just was like, he would just crash on the floor.
That's a maniacal level of focus. And the thing is that if you dug like just a little bit deep under the surface, you realize he's probably not particularly a well-balanced or a happy human being, right?
He'll tell you that. He's, what's the term, neurodivergent?
Yeah.
That's probably also very common in entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
It's really fun because, but look, you know, the criticisms of both Musk and Jobs is they weren't like Jobs wasn't a coder, and Musk didn't found PayPal. He didn't found Tesla. He's listed as a founder, but he's not the one that all the critiques of Musk and Jobs was they just they just happened to be along for the ride. Is what people kind of attribute them to, right? It's like
I mean, I think that's a
just
bullshit.
You just
line,
rode Wozniak's coattails, Steve. Like
but...
that's all
yeah,
you did.
Right.
And it's like you're missing the and Jobs has done a terrible job describing what he does that is unique as an entrepreneur. I'm really curious to pull on that a little bit and think, all right, so what did Jobs and Musk actually do to make these companies great? Was it luck, or what was the attributes that they brought to the table that actually made Apple, Pixar, SpaceX, the Neuralink, Tesla, PayPal? Like, what are the things that made those things true? Was it luck?
I mean, I think it's Steve Blank who coined, maybe didn't coin it, but he called it the reality distortion field. And it goes back to your original point, which is the point of delusion. And this idea that you have to be incredibly delusional for this, like you have to believe, for lack of a better word, you have to believe your own bullshit. Now, the problem that we have, Anthony, in the overall topic is that when we start talking about entrepreneurship, the people that come up are the outliers. We start talking about Jobs and we start talking about Elon Musk and we talk about these incredible founders, right? That are all outliers. We don't talk about I want to say maybe not millions, tens of thousands of people that have experienced utter and miserable and devastating and heartbreaking failure along the way, which is
millions.
Probably what you're signing up for.
It's millions, but there. What we're trying to get to here, Chris, is what essentially, if you're watching this, how do you decide whether or not you should try to be a founder? Should you try? And so part of it is looking at the obvious, icons of entrepreneurship and trying to figure out what makes them unique. But also, I think it's important to look at them as some of the things that you need to be are what they are, and look at that. Now you're probably not going to build something as big as Jobs or Musk or Bezos, etc. But there's some commonalities there. One of them is a maniacal focus on an end goal. Some of it is delusional belief. So when you talk about really big wins, you have to be willing to put everything on the line. But going back to your original point, you don't need to do that if you don't need to build a unicorn. You don't need to put everything on the line if you don't want to build a unicorn. You can do low risk building of businesses, lower risk, where you don't have to mortgage your house to do it. Start a services business, which is typically lower risk. But you still need some common attributes to be able to think that you can run a company. One is being able to paint a great vision. Would you agree that all founders that are successful can say, we're going to climb that hill, and being able to get people behind you to do it?
100%. I mean, this the core ability of leadership is 100% a commonality between founders that great founders I know.
Yeah. So what are the attributes of a good leader?
the ability. I mean, so to me, I think it's less to do with charisma, which is kind of the popular narrative. And now charisma is something that my kids talk about as just kind of this thing. It was kind of almost something was not describable before, but charisma has nothing to do with it. What has everything to do with it is the ability to tell a great story and the ability to paint a picture for other humans, because that's how we understand the world, is through stories. Is like, this is the world. If we do this, this will happen. If we miss, don't worry about it. We'll figure it out along the way, and let's go. And it's a absolute commonality. And if you look at the great entrepreneurs, they're incredible storytellers. And really, Anthony, almost every good founder that are our friends that we know, that people, they're really solid storytellers. They just understand how to paint a picture of the future and how the future will be different with our collective solution, as we're driving towards that vision. Agree?
I think you're right, but to counter that, just because you're a good storyteller doesn't mean you're going to be a good founder.
Agreed. Yeah, I think it is necessary but not sufficient.
Okay, so what's the next thing that you need? Again, I'm doing a person.
Yeah,
we're asking folks to do a self inventory here. Like, check some boxes for me as I'm trying to figure out whether or not I'm a founder.
So I'm going to go back to something incredibly practical and something that I really wish I would have done early in my entrepreneurship journey. I have insane risk tolerance. I shouldn't have. When I quit my good, cushy day job the day my second son was born, the day Sam was born. It was a terrible idea. I should never have done that.
Yeah.
But understanding what your risk tolerance is and understanding what your actual runway is as a human being, and having breaks along the way to realize, like, hey, you need to stop and go back and lick your wounds and get a job. And nobody in our world judges that at all. You tried something that didn't work, no big deal. Go get yourself right financially and then come back and try again. So what is the actual risk that you're willing to take and put on your family and put on yourself? And there's kind of a little bit of a truism that younger people tend to be better entrepreneurs. It's not true as far as the statistics go.
It's not.
But oftentimes they just have more runway because living expenses are so low that they can keep at it for a long time. And then so you see a lot of these outlier companies were founded when people were 21 or 22 because they had no living expenses, or in college they were doing it out of a dorm room. So they were doing it on their parents' dime, right? So I think that having a tolerance for risk is important. But there's a little bit of a myth out there that we are these wild risk takers that just are cowboys and we, damn the torpedoes, burn the boats, let's go. I think that particularly
I hate
now,
that phrase, burn the boats.
Yeah, it's stupid.
Yeah.
Because the reality is that when you and I now think about companies, we think about projects, we're risk averse. We're trying to mitigate all this amount of risk. The difference is, and so, back to the original question, before you start, understand what risks you're willing to take and be very brutally honest with yourself about those risks. Even though you're super optimistic, you're going to be super rich, it's going to be amazing. Be brutally honest with yourself about when you're going to stop, turn around, quit, go get a job, come back to it. And again, there's no shame in that. I think that understanding what risk is and understanding the risk you're willing to take is a huge component of it. And, back to the Jobs thing, Jobs was a pretty good engineer. He worked at Atari. And one of his whole things is like, well, I'm going to go do this because I work in Silicon Valley. I could always go back and be an engineer. It's like I could get a job doing that tomorrow. So he didn't feel a whole lot of personal risk. He was willing to take those sorts of risks. And so understanding risk, I would say, is the second component. Does that resonate with you or no?
Yeah, it does, and you're right. Like, I think evaluating risks is a really great way of putting it, but also you have a different relationship with risk as an entrepreneur than you do as an employee. You just have it's just a different relationship. As an employee, you're risking shame,
A little bit of
and
reputation.
maybe having to go look for another job. As an entrepreneur, you might be risking your house, your ability to feed your kids.
Your marriage, your friends.
It's a different relationship. And there's something else I want to talk about also that you mentioned, and that is optimism. And another common attribute I see in founders is this weird mix of optimism and paranoia, where you think that you have this huge opportunity to do whatever you're going to do, and you're paranoid that somebody's going to do it first and better and faster. And so you have to be always looking forward and over your shoulder. It's this really weird, like, you'll talk to somebody and they'll be talking about their excitement for the opportunity with passion and gravitas, and then you ask them one question about what they're worried about, and they just go dark. Like, their whole face turns and they twist into this, like, I'm really worried about, if they're being honest, right? If they're being vulnerable, they'll be really honest about, like, being really afraid. And it's rare for somebody to be. There's not a lot of people you can talk to about that. And
Right.
further, you can't tell your board you're paranoid that next quarter you're gonna be overtaken by your biggest competitor. You can't tell that to your employees. Anyway, but that weird dichotomy of optimism and paranoia. Have you seen that?
It's such a good point. And I use the humble, hungry statement a lot, like about, that both these things need to be true. You need to be humble and hungry. The other one is, I mentioned in a previous episode that my favorite movie of all time, and really my favorite analogy for entrepreneurship, is baseball. So my favorite movie is Bull Durham. Love that movie. It's incredible. Early Kevin Costner, Nuke Lelouch is terrific. But the Yoda character, which is Kevin Costner in this one, for the young pitcher, at the very end of the movie, he walks in and they're breaking down the last piece of advice that Kevin Costner, the catcher, is giving to the young up and coming pitcher. And he says, the trick about this game is fear and arrogance. And it's like, that is such a great analogy for what we do, which is you have to have this level of arrogance, because that's that sense of optimism. We can do this. I am arrogant enough. I am confident enough that we can do this, but at the same time, sitting with a concept of fear and sitting with a concept that failure is always one bad decision, one bad break, one competitor moving into your space, one
database glitch, one computer outage, one Amazon support ticket.
Yeah, exactly. 1 million variables.
Yeah.
Most of which you don't control.
Yes.
That's a very fucked up place to be.
Yeah.
Which is, I'm arrogant enough to believe I can make success, be successful where 90% of people fail, or whatever it is. But also sitting with the fears of knowing you're not in charge. There's so many things that have to go right for this thing to go right, for this company to go right, this project to go right. It's pretty screwy. I mean, I know both you and I have had those experiences, right?
Yeah. What do you, so So talking about attributes that we could, like you said, we could talk days about the attributes. What about sacrifices? So if you're going to do this, what do you need to be willing to give up?
I mean, this is a wild question, and the thing you started at the top of the show with, which is dead right. I I don't believe you need to be a terrible father. I don't believe you need to sacrifice relationship with your spouse to be a founder. But yet there's a weird common thread here. There's a lot of people I know that have lost marriages, that have lost friends, that have terrible relationship with their kids because they're so maniacally focused on the outcome. They're so maniacally focused of the fear and arrogance component that they just ignore the relationships in their lives. And that's pretty fucked up. It's pretty fucked up to say if you're going to do this job, you have to be willing to sacrifice everything. What I'll tell you is that when you're in it, you don't even realize that you know that you're not being a good father, a good husband. And for me, last time around, I've never missed my kids' stuff, right? Like I show up at soccer games. I think that along the way, I've always been prioritized being a really good dad. But you know what I deprioritize, Anthony? Me. I was 25 pounds heavier after my last company. I was drinking too much. I was eating too much. I was deeply stressed out. My blood pressure was high. My doctor was starting to look at me being like, hey, dude, hey, you think you might want to chill out a little bit? Like, so there's a dark side to this business. And a lot of times it does come down to relationships, but I think more oftentimes it comes down to your own mental and physical health. Agree or disagree?
So I think there's something that I realized a while ago, and that is when you choose to be an entrepreneur and hire folks and build a company, you're taking on a greater responsibility than just your family. You're taking on a responsibility for the people that work for you. And so I think the reason why there's probably an imbalance for entrepreneurs and with their families is because they have the sense of it's not just their family they're dealing with. It's everybody that chooses to work with them. The weight, everybody that chooses to invest in them. The weight of that can be crushing. I've certainly been there where I've had to do layoffs, and the thing that I think of is, I've let these people down.
100%.
Yeah. And so it's understandable that, this gets into the next question is work-life balance. Like, so it's understandable so one of the sacrifices you need to be able to let go of, one of the sacrifices you need to have is this notion of work-life balance. There is no such thing as an entrepreneur as work-life balance. It doesn't, if that's what you're looking for, you're not an entrepreneur. Like I hate to say that, but if work-life balance comes out of your mouth as a requirement for you, especially in the first 5 years, you're doing this you're doing this with bad expectations. Freedom, yes, and freedom is great, and eventually you're looking to be able to maybe just go sit on a beach with a Mai Tai for the rest of your life. Maybe. And there's a lot of
but most people don't do that. Like most founders don't.
Most entrepreneurs, like the notion of retirement is like, sitting on a beach. For me, sitting on a beach with a Mai Tai is torture. It's not fun.
Yeah.
I need to be doing something. I need to be working with my hands or thinking through a problem. That's my happy place. So work-life balance is not a thing I pursue because it's not in me. So that is something you're going to have to give up as well. You give up your nights, your weekends. You try to lean in on those things that are family oriented, like not miss your kids' stuff and not completely ignore your spouse. But you're right. One of the things you give up is you. You give up this notion of you. The other sacrifice thing that I think of that's related to that is, you give up pride. You can't be a founder and not be willing to set up your trade show booth and work it. You can't outsource the shitty jobs. You have to be willing to go do it, because you're likely the one that's going to have to do it in the early stages. You can't leave your corporate job. Everybody that leaves a corporate job and jumps into an entrepreneurial journey, they always say the same thing. I didn't really realize the amount of support that I had that is just not there as an entrepreneur. So you're giving up that safety net of, if something screws up, somebody else will help me fix it. No, it's you. Anything else that you can think of that you have to sacrifice?
I mean, it's such a good point. Like, so number one is, there is a myth out there that, like, you immediately, like, you decide to be an entrepreneur and you have to be a terrible dad. It's not true. You can do this job and be a good father, and you can be a good husband. There's a price to be paid. Oftentimes, for me, a lot of it was friendships, Anthony. Like, I had close friends that I ignored for a long period of time.
Same.
And, people stop texting you after a while. If you don't text them back, people stop asking you to go out and have a beer or play golf or whatever else. They stop texting. And, as a bona fide extrovert, as we've discussed, that stuff matters. And I, in a lot of capacity, I've sacrificed a lot of really close friendships down to the years. The second piece is, and this really, I think, starts to, at least for me, encapsulate the concept. I don't think of it as work. Yeah. Was I up super late last night, working on a project? Yeah, but it was fun. I enjoyed that stuff. It was a creative process for me. And I was trying to tell a story in a really unique way. And there's a guy that you and I both know. His first name's John. And I won't tell you, but he's an icon in our community, like, just incredible guy. And I met him one time on like a Saturday or something like that. And he said, I tell my wife I'm going to wash the car, and I sit in the car or sit at the car wash and do work. It's like, I just need to do it. Like, you just love it. It's fun. And so the piece of this where I know that we're on the negative side of this thing, but I don't look at it as work. It's the thing I love to do. It's the thing I like the most. And so if it's, sometimes, do I work a lot of hours, or do I just play a whole lot? I just have a lot of fun doing the thing I love to do. It's kind of, there's some gray area there, but at the same time, it can be brutally difficult. It can be brutally hard, but I still love it. I still enjoy it.
The analogy I that pops into my head on that is, there's a Comedians in Cars with Coffee episode where it's
I love Simon because he's equally maniacal. He's just maniacal.
Yeah, well,
about
all
comedy.
comedians are, right? So I talk about this all the time. There's a lot of connections to draw between being a comic and being a founder. Martin Short was the episode I'm thinking about. And Jerry's talking about, do you have any hobbies? And Martin Short says, no. I used to tell people that I like tennis, only to make me look more balanced.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Just so people would be like,
tennis.
Tennis.
Yeah. All right. Well, so with that, I feel like we could talk about this quite a bit. One last quick question. Let's talk about founder support systems. So there's, I mentioned that there's not a lot of people you can talk to about the things that you're going through. You can't talk about difficult things with your employees, your spouse, board members, your friends. There's not a lot, and shameful self-promotion here, but that's kind of what we're doing with How to Founder. We're trying to build a community and support structures for founders. Some of it is this podcast, which is hopefully lead into a book, and some of it is more educational, but also we're trying to build what we're calling the founder board or founder peer groups. Talk a little bit about the peer group thing and why that matters, Chris.
Well, so I think that the first piece of advice, and you've hit around it, is this is a incredible job, but it can be incredibly lonely. Incredibly lonely. And it's funny because you're surrounded by people all day, every day. And oftentimes they're your employees or your customers, but really what's going on inside, you don't get to talk about that much. And so the first thing, my piece of advice is find a group of people that you can go talk and be real and be open, honest, and vulnerable. And there is nobody that understands your world like other founders. So go find them. Look them up on LinkedIn, reach out, ask them for a cup of coffee. Now, what we're doing is trying to systematize that a little bit. And so try to bring people together in a more systematized way, because again, what's the one thing that we tend to do as founders, which is ignore ourselves. I'm fine. I'll be all right. Don't worry about me.
Things are okay.
Oh, it's fine. There's a joke that's like, if you say things are fine, they're never fine. Right. And so, Jerry Colonna, the guy who's kind of the father of founder coaching, he says he gets people to cry by asking, how are you? No, really. How are you? Like, that's it. He says, like, how are you? Oh, I'm great. I'm fine. No, really. How are you? So like, the idea is that, we're trying to figure out a way to just make sure that people are surrounded by everybody that they need. But whether it be just, in your town, find somebody on LinkedIn, find your founder friends, reach out to them. And then when you show up, stop fucking bullshitting. Just be honest. Just take off the pitch hat for 1 fucking second and just be like, shit's really hard right now.
Yeah.
I love it, but it's hard.
Go find groups go find other founders to
it's pretty much it. I mean,
to be in community with. Yeah.
Because really the answer is that when you're around other founders, you're right. It's just magical. It's special. You can talk honestly about what's going on in your life, because most of us have been through it.
All right. So to trying to wrap this up, and I really wanted to come out of this with like 5 traits that make a founder, and I think we failed miserably. But there is this weird dichotomy of delusion and belief, storytelling, the ability to tell a good story, the ability to do it without ego, but with drive. Definitely an appetite for risk. Definitely a love for the work. Not a love for the tasks, but a love for the work that you get to do. The autonomy, the ability to work alone and be lonely. And I think that the other thing is to just have the ability to have no shame, right? To do the things that are required of the job, regardless of whether or not you want to do them. The discipline, if all of that sounds like a miserable train wreck of a life to you, then don't do it. It's okay. Like, be the envy of founders that can't hold a normal job, that's my summary of what I think we've talked about. Chris, is there anything that you can think of that where folks can go learn more about being an entrepreneur and digging through this? I
I
can't
mean,
think of any. But I can't. I wish
the
there
way
was.
that I'd summarize what you just said is if you can be happy doing something else, go do that other thing.
You go to that other thing.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
But if you can't, then come be a founder and be one of the
Yeah.
misfits like us. Um, there are tons of great resources, but the problem that we have is that most of those resources talk about the outliers. They don't talk about the normal people. They don't write books about people like me that have failed more times than they've been successful. And so really the resources that you have is this incredible magical program called LinkedIn. And you get on and you search for somebody in your city, town, and you look for any meetups or any other humans that are founders. And if there's not any meetups or groups or coffee groups or dinner groups or anything like that in your community, there probably is. But if there's not, you're a freaking founder. Go start one, man.
Go start one, and
Create
we
it.
can help. Seriously, come connect with Chris and I on LinkedIn, and we'll help you do it in your town. We'll help you
I
start
say
it.
this with like knowing that there's like 2 people that listen to this now. Hopefully not in the future. There's like 1 million that reach out to us, but you're not alone.
Mm-mm.
And if you're in a bad place, reach out, man. I'll jump on the phone. I'll have a cup of coffee. Almost any founder I know will do the same thing.
Yeah,
Right?
that is for
You're
sure.
not alone.
Yeah, that is for sure. Chris, we're supposed to wrap this up with what did you learn this week, but I hate that because I can't think of anything every week.
Dude,
So I'm gonna ask you a different question.
All right, fine.
Can you think of a time? So what do you tell a founder? What do you tell a founder that comes up with a new founder that comes up with to you and tells you their idea and it's a horrible idea? Like it's not going to work. What do you say to them?
You idiot. No, I'm totally kidding. What I say is typically, hey man, I'm not so sure about the idea, but understand that most of us that started, our first idea was not the thing. And so remember, your idea is worthless. Even if it's like Facebook was a worthless idea. Really, the only thing that matters is your ability to execute. I love to hear you because I've heard you be mean before when we're doing pitch competitions. What have you said?
I don't feel it as it being mean.
Being direct.
Direct.
Sure.
Yeah, in hindsight, it was mean, but it wasn't meant to be mean, right? Like I told the founder once that his pitch had no soul, which is in hindsight, I could have probably stated that a little bit better.
Right.
The thing that pops into my head is this after a speaking event, I had a founder come up to me wanting me to get involved in his business, and he had this idea for a lazy Susan for pot smokers that you set on your table, and you could everybody was on a table and you could spin around. I don't know but all the paraphernalia was on it, and you can just spin it around, and
it's $1 billion idea. That company just IPO'd.
He called it Blazy Susan.
Yeah, Blazing Susan.
Blazing
exactly.
Susan, obviously.
I IPO'd last week. It was $1 billion valuation.
In my head, I thought to myself, this is a crap idea. This is terrible. Terrible. I didn't tell him that. I told him it's probably not my area of expertise. And I just shook my head as I walked away. He's crushing it.
Yeah.
By the way, like he's crushing it. My advice is always now couched with, it's not, I don't know. Like, I don't know the space, or this isn't something that I could get passionate about. But it's not, what I've learned is that I have no clue what's going to make it or not. I really don't. I have no clue. I thought my first indication of this is when I was working in an ad agency, and the Taco Bell dog, which kind of ages me, but the Yo Quiero Taco Bell dog came out. I'm like, this is going to flop. Like, what are they doing? And it wound up being the hit of the year. So my gauge for what's going to work or not work is terrible. So I've learned not to tell people that their idea sucks.
I know that we're out of time, but I'll just add on real quick. About 7-8 years ago, something like that, maybe 9, little company pitched thought it was the stupidest idea I've ever heard. I was like, God, this has got no freaking way of working. It was a pitch competition. The judges and I awarded it to a company that was out of business 3 months later. The company was called Ibotta. They just IPO'd.
Yeah, yeah. We just don't know. So when you go look for advice, take all advice with a grain of salt. You know what you're doing better than anybody else. And with that, I'm going to wrap things up. I'm going to remind you that to follow us on LinkedIn. So linkedin.com/companies/howtofounder. We're trying to hit 125 followers. We're getting really close, so please help us out there. And in exchange, you'll get notifications of our local events and our podcasts and all of our fun online stuff. And next week, or not next week, on Thursday, Chris is going to be talking about something very practical, and we're gonna work through it with How to Founder, and that is how do I incorporate? What are the entities that we're going to, what are the entity options for us, and what is going to be the best option? And we're actually going to do it with our second guest, Chris, Evan Coates, and he's going to walk us through how to form the right entity for How to Founder.
Really looking forward to that conversation.
All right, with that, everybody, thank you so much for joining us on our episode of How to Founder, and we'll see you on Thursday.
Bye.